They called the police on a woman for trying to withdraw her own money. The bank manager, Mr. Halverson, saw Margaret Lane in her mechanic's jacket and work boots and assumed she didn't belong. He never imagined she held a multi-million-dollar trust. He never thought she'd record every moment. And he certainly never expected the system to turn on itself. But when they picked Margaret, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know Margaret Lane wasn't just a client. She was a co-owner, a strategist, and a silent force behind a powerful equity firm. What came next wasn't just justice. It was exposure, a firing, a financial collapse, and a reckoning that swept through boardrooms and headlines alike. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman. It's about all of us. Rain fell quietly over the city that morning, painting reflections on the sidewalk like faded memories. Inside Whitestone Reserve Bank, the light was cold, the air still. No one spoke. But something had already shifted. Justice, quiet and unstoppable, had just walked through the door. Rain tapped gently on the sidewalks that morning, turning the city into a soft blur of gray reflections. Inside that haze, a woman named Margaret Lane stepped through the glass doors of Whitestone Reserve Bank. She wasn't dressed like their usual clientele. No tailored coat, no glossy heels. Just worn jeans, a mechanic's jacket, and boots that had known the grit of honest labor. Her face, calm but unreadable, carried no makeup, no jewelry, only the quiet pride of someone used to being underestimated. Her ID tucked beside a modest phone, linked to a trust fund with over $7 million, but no one could have guessed that from the way she walked. To the bank's security cameras and staff, she might as well have been invisible. As the doors closed behind her with a hush, the man at the reception desk tilted his head, brows subtly raised. He took one look at Margaret and pressed a small button beneath the marble counter. Barely a motion, but it would change everything. Have you ever been judged before a single word left your mouth? Inside, the air smelled of cedarwood and espresso. Conversations paused as Margaret approached the teller. She asked simply, "For $12,000, 0 cents in cash." The amount wasn't unusual for a client of her tier, but her appearance was. The teller glanced at her card, then at her face. Without a smile, without processing her request, he said, "Please wait here," and disappeared into a side office. For a moment, the world stood still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Margaret remained silent. She didn't fidget, she didn't pace. But inside, something turned over. Not rage, something colder, more precise. Sometimes, all it takes is walking into the wrong room, looking the wrong way, for the world to reveal how it really sees you. The silence in Whitestone Reserve Bank was suddenly too loud. Margaret stood at the counter, her hands steady, while murmurs stirred behind polished doors. Moments later, a man emerged, sharp suit, practiced smile, eyes scanning. The branch manager. He greeted her with a syrupy politeness, the kind that sticks in your teeth. "Just a few standard checks, Miss Lane," he said, not quite meeting her gaze. "We need to verify the source of these funds." Margaret nodded once. "Of course," she said. He asked for more identification, then about the purpose of the withdrawal. Then for documentation she knew wasn't standard protocol. As he spoke, a security guard approached from the left, another from the right, silent shadows in dark uniform. Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for her phone, tapped the screen, and let the recording begin. Why do some people assume suspicion comes before service? 5 minutes passed. Then the police arrived. 2 officers, hands at their belts, eyes scanning the room. The manager spoke quickly, too quickly, explaining it was just procedure, nothing personal. But the air had already shifted. It smelled like something burning, like trust set aflame. Margaret turned her phone screen to face the officers. It displayed her banking app, her name, her co-ownership, and an alert from the bank's internal system. Incident logged, account holder present. Behind her calm eyes, she watched them falter. One officer hesitated, his hand, inches from the cuffs on his belt, froze. The weight of uncertainty settled over the room like fog. Who had the real authority now? Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is remain completely still and let the truth walk in by itself. Margaret didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply let their actions record themselves, moment by moment, each click of her phone capturing something deeper than policy, something called dignity. What began as a quiet inconvenience had now triggered a storm behind the walls of Whitestone Reserve Bank. As the police hesitated and Margaret held her phone steady, something far beyond that branch was stirring. 200 miles away at Whitestone's corporate headquarters, the system had detected a Code Zero breach. That alert was never meant for routine banking issues. It was reserved for events involving board-level clients or federal intervention. Margaret, it turned out, was more than just a wealthy client. She was also a silent partner in a data equity firm, and her account carried access privileges most branch employees didn't even know existed. How often do the people in power forget who's truly in the room? In a dimly lit office lined with monitors, red alerts blinked in unison. Legal teams, compliance officers, and crisis managers began moving like parts of a single machine. Someone in PR locked the company's social media accounts. Another began drafting a statement in case of media escalation. Meanwhile, Margaret stood in the lobby, still surrounded, still recording. Through the glass, she watched raindrops fall like tiny truths, quiet, constant, impossible to stop. Upstairs, one senior executive muttered, "Who authorized this?" But it was too late. Every frame of the security footage, every clipped exchange with the teller, every slow step of the guards, it was all being reviewed in real time, automatically archived, unalterable. Back at the branch, the manager wiped sweat from his brow. His hands trembled as he glanced at his terminal. A new message had appeared. Internal investigation initiated. His own face was now part of the data. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly silence can turn into evidence. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had already set something greater into motion. A quiet reckoning, powered by the very system that tried to ignore her. By the time Margaret returned home that evening, the rain had stopped, but the storm had only just begun. She sat at her kitchen table, simple, uncluttered, a chipped mug beside her laptop, and posted a single sentence on social media. "Let's see what equality really looks like." Attached was a 2-minute video, grainy footage of her calm voice, her still hands, and a circle of uniforms tightening around her. Within minutes, the numbers ticked upward. 400 shares, 1,000, 200 likes, then 8,000. By morning, it was everywhere. At Whitestone's headquarters, panic was now a meeting room with no oxygen. Tweets turned into headlines. Banking while black trended across the country. 3 news networks aired the footage. One called it a quiet civil rights moment caught live. How many others had walked into a room and walked out changed, but unseen? The bank's stock began to dip. A PR firm was called before sunrise. "Minimize exposure," someone said. But it was too late for that. The truth had already found an audience. Behind every retweet was a memory. A mother remembered her son being followed in a store. A retired teacher recalled being denied a loan for no reason. The story wasn't just Margaret's anymore. It belonged to millions. And still, she said nothing more. No press conference, no interview. Instead, she watched as federal regulators announced surprise audits, watched as board members scrambled to schedule emergency calls, watched as the branch manager received a letter of dismissal. Violation of professional conduct. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that only speak once and let the world answer. Margaret closed her laptop and poured herself a cup of tea. Not in triumph, not in anger, but in quiet, clear certainty. What they had seen wasn't just a breach of policy. It was a mirror, and now everyone had to look. 7 days later, Margaret Lane returned to Whitestone Reserve Bank, but she was no longer the woman in work boots. This time, she wore a navy blue suit tailored with surgical precision. Her shoes, low-heeled and silent, carried her across the lobby without a sound. Her hair, once hidden beneath a hood, flowed freely, pinned back with a single silver clip that caught the light like a blade's edge. She didn't stop at the front desk. No guards flanked her. No teller hesitated. She walked straight to the private elevator and pressed the button for the 6th floor. How does a room react when the person they underestimated comes back to lead it? The corridor was lined with frosted glass and brass fixtures. At the end waited room 688, the executive conference room. 12 people sat around the mahogany table. Legal heads, security chiefs, board liaisons, and seated awkwardly among them, the former teller, now demoted to records management, his hands trembling over a folder. Margaret took the seat at the head. The screen behind her lit up. Reputational damage report. Her voice was calm, surgical. We estimate direct losses at $74 million, 0 cents. Stock dips, client attrition, damage control. She paused and clicked the remote. A U.S. map appeared, dotted with red pins. Each red mark is a similar incident. Each represents not just a person, but a warning ignored. The room fell silent, eyes darting away. Margaret looked at the former teller. His photo now appeared in the corner of the screen, tagged Risk Factor. What does it feel like to see yourself as part of the problem? Margaret leaned forward. Justice, she said, is no longer abstract. It's measurable. This bank paid for forgetting that. She let the sentence hang in the air. No raised voice, no judgment, just truth. Above them, another boardroom filled for an emergency meeting, and somewhere deep in her pocket, Margaret's phone buzzed with a draft addressed to shareholders. She wasn't giving a presentation. She was delivering a reckoning. The final slide lit up behind Margaret, casting a pale glow over the conference room. Who's next? The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They sat in bold font against a white screen, daring everyone in the room to look up and face it. One board member shifted in his seat. Another stared at the tabletop, his fingers tightening around a pen. Margaret said nothing for a long moment. In a single week, the system that once tried to shrink her into silence had turned her into its mirror and its measuring stick. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't accused. She had simply let the truth unfold, frame by frame, bite by bite. Can you feel the weight of silence when it's filled with consequences? Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Light poured across the glass facade of the building. A strange contrast, considering the reckoning still unfolding within. Behind closed doors, the board convened once more. Emergency protocols, risk mitigation, resignation options. They were speaking in numbers now, but every figure came back to a single name. Margaret Lane. Somewhere below, in the branch where it all began, customers still moved quietly between the velvet ropes. The coffee still brewed. But nothing was the same. Not anymore. Margaret stood, gathered her notes, and offered a final glance to the room. You cannot undo what's been done, she said softly. But you can decide who you'll be next time. That was all. As she walked out, her phone vibrated. A shareholder vote confirmed. Reform policy initiated. A new position offered. But she didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about waking people up. And sometimes the loudest revolution comes not with fists raised, but with one unblinking question. What would you do if it were you? Sometimes the most powerful stand doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing still and letting the truth speak for itself. Margaret Lane didn't raise her voice or demand attention. She simply walked into a place where she was silently told she didn't belong. and she let the facts speak louder than assumptions. In a world that often rushes to judge, her story reminds us of the quiet strength in dignity, patience, and clarity. We've all been underestimated at some point in life, looked over, talked past, or misjudged. And as we grow older, we carry those moments with us. But there's something comforting in knowing that even a simple, calm act, recording, watching, waiting, can shift the balance, not just for ourselves, but for others who follow. What if we all believed a little more in the quiet power of showing up with truth? You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes all it takes is being steady when the world shakes and choosing to respond, not react. Margaret's story isn't just about banking or injustice. It's about grace under pressure, and how that grace can open doors we didn't even know we were knocking on. In a quiet room, Margaret Lane stood alone by a window, the city moving gently beyond the glass. No headlines, no applause, just the soft hum of life continuing. She didn't need anyone to see her victory. She had survived, spoken without shouting, and reminded the world that calm truth carries its own kind of thunder. What followed wasn't revenge. It was restoration. New policies were written, old attitudes slowly unlearned. And somewhere in the spaces between news cycles and boardroom memos, something quieter but deeper took root. The belief that dignity deserves recognition, not suspicion. Her story became more than a moment. It became a message carried forward by those who've been overlooked and those now willing to look closer. These stories stayed with you. Share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.